President Trump also took time out of his schedule to apparently turn down an offer to be Time Magazine's Person of the Year again. He tweeted, "Time Magazine called to say that I was probably going to be named Man of the Year like last year, but I would have to agree to an interview and a major photo shoot. I said probably is no good and took a pass. Thanks anyway." But Time Magazine later tweeted saying the president is incorrect about how the magazine chooses the Person of the Year. Time's chief content officer later said the president's tweet didn't have, quote, a speck of truth. The Time's Person of the Year, by the way, will be announced on December 6th. Peter Mathews is a political analyst, professor of political science at Cypress College, and I asked him earlier, why would the president even tweet this in the first place?
It seems to me that Mr. Trump wanted to make it known that some important source such as Time Magazine really wanted him on the cover or whatever, or be interviewed, and that's something that gives him a greater sense of importance. He's done this in the past as well, in different ways, so it's quite interesting and probably very instructive of how he operates quite often.
It also reminds us that Mr. Trump has turned down interview requests with mainstream media, any major media but Fox, since May, since that was just days before the Mueller investigation began. Is that a factor here, as far as you're concerned?
I think so. I think to some extent he doesn't want to face media that could be very critical or analytical of what he's actually doing. He'd rather be on a friendly network like Fox that would praise him and, you know, embellish what he's doing, and rather than coming out and critically analyzing it as CNN and MSNBC and other stations do. So that maybe that's why he stayed away since May.
All right.
Very interesting.
Let's look at what we learned this week, that former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn's lawyers have stopped talking to Donald Trump's lawyers, indicating that Michael Flynn may now be cooperating with the Russia investigation, or at least in talks for potentially cooperating with the Russia investigation. Should the White House be afraid of this?
I think that there's no guarantee that he will cooperate against Mr. Trump, but there's a good chance that he will, because otherwise why would they actually cut off the communications with the Trump lawyers? I think there could be something here, and if that's the case, it's very problematic for the Trump side, because Flynn, of all people, would know a lot about what happened in the campaign. He would know what kind of activity or contacts that were with Russia from not just himself, but other people as well, and perhaps maybe even, you know, what the president did and said at certain times, more than anyone else. This is very, very important. I think that this development is instructive of what could be happening.
He's thought to have the most criminal exposure, he and his son. In fact, he has said to people around him that he was worried about what might happen to his son. So,
yeah, Michael Flynn Jr., yes.
So obviously there's an incentive for him to come clean and to try and reduce his criminal exposure as far as the Russia investigation is concerned, and share everything he knows or might know.
Absolutely, because when your son is involved, it's your family, your most immediate family, and you've got a double responsibility to yourself and your son from the Flynn perspective, to do as much as they can or he can to avoid any real prosecution after an indictment. So it looks from the outside, and we can't really know exactly what's going on from the inside yet, but it looks from the outside that General Flynn is really trying his best to save his son and himself, and it's possible he'll have to tell everything he knows to Mr. Mueller, especially if Mr. Mueller has actually agreed to that. So it'll be very interesting to follow this up and see what happens.
Okay, and CNN is also learning on Friday that the State Department, run by the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, does not want to send very high-level representatives at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit that's going to be held in India. Apparently the reason, this is what our sources are telling us, is that Ivanka Trump is going to be there, and they essentially don't want to give too much support to Ivanka Trump because Rex Tillerson is frustrated with her.
Well, certainly the whole idea of having, you know, your own children in the administration at such high levels as Donald Trump has done is quite problematic. I mean, not to mention the idea of nepotism, but also how qualified is Ivanka Trump or Jared Kushner in terms of really shaping foreign policy? It's a very important question. I'm sure Mr. Tillerson is very concerned about that as well, and perhaps that's why the State Department has decided that, to not give credibility or a lot of, you know, that type of shoring up support for Ivanka being there. And I think
but look, is there any question as to who's running U.S. diplomacy?
Well, of course there is a question, because officially the Secretary of State is supposed to be in charge of the whole thing and has to have the full confidence of the president, which is really important so that other leaders in the world will actually believe the Secretary of State when he makes comments and makes pledges or a certain policy. They will believe him if he has the confidence of the president. But this president has undermined Secretary of State Tillerson several times. For example, when Secretary of State Tillerson said that we have open channels toward North Korea, that we in fact are working on a diplomatic solution. A diplomatic solution is very important, he said. At the same day, practically, President Trump went out and said, Rex Tillerson is a good man, but he's wasting his time negotiating. That completely undermines him. So there's a real problem here as to who is really running the show with U.S. foreign policy.
Peter Mathews there speaking to us from Los Angeles.